Hello everyone, it's Quick Flash, back with another video. Before I get started, I'm assuming this video will get a lot more views than my videos normally do, because all of a sudden I went from like 90 subscribers up to 170 after that Joshua Bardwell interview. So for anyone that saw that, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you've been enjoying IMUF so far. But let's just get into it. Today I'm going to be talking about what was added in version 0.2.30 all the way up to version 0.2.38. So I've been a little bit behind on some of this. Well, actually I don't need to go over 0.2.30, I did that in my last video. But 0.2.32, well 0.2.31, that build allows the Helio filter to use every normal filter that a regular flight controller can. So by default they're all turned off, but you can fly them and enable them and get them to work. And I just kind of did it because it makes life a bit easier for me coding, and anyone that wants to use those, you now can. You don't have to say anymore. It's just going to work if you're using a Helio flight controller. 0.3.2, I added this exciting new thing that I'm calling the IMUF Sharpness. I removed R weight and I made it a static value. The R weight just affected the Kalman filter and how it did some of its predictions. I've removed it, made it static because nobody touched it anyways. Everyone left it static anyhow. So I instead replaced it with IMUF Sharpness. And the IMUF Sharpness, something that, well, in version 0.2.32, it only worked on Helio flight controllers, and you had to update to the newest IMUF version. And it's currently version IMUF 227. And essentially, what it does is, in the IMUF filter code, there's a dynamic biquad filter. And I set that filter up so that it heavily overfilters. For example, the most that filter will filter is all the way down to 10 Hertz as a biquad filter. Now it's something like 25 milliseconds of latency or even more. It's ridiculous. But to compensate for this super overfiltering, I created IMUF Sharpness, which dynamically changes the cutoff of this filter. And it does that by taking your base value for the filter, which is 10 Hertz, and adding a multiplier to it. And this was already in the code, but I just made the multiplier more dynamic and aggressive, and I allowed you to pick how aggressive you want it with this IMUF Sharpness value. Now, IMUF Sharpness seems to be working really well. People are liking a value of like 3,500, some people like it lower. It just kind of depends on the feel you want, but you can get something that is you can get a quite different feel, and most people that are flying it are noticing longer flight times, less motor noise, things like that. It's working the battery less hard because you're filtering more. But because of how the filter is dynamically set up, times where the overfiltering would become a big problem, it reduces how much it's filtering. So you can look at it kind of like that. So it filters a ton when it doesn't matter as much, but when filtering would become a problem, it really just, gets rid of a lot of that filtering. And it seems to fly really well from what I've seen so far. What's in this version? 0.2.33 was an interesting version. So something that we did was we took the Gyro Average filter, set the defaults to 0. We're still thinking of whether or not we should keep it in the code. As of right now, we're planning on keeping it, but not setting it default because we think there might be some good use cases for it. Let's see what else. We've also made it so that Witchcraft is default of 2 per axis, and on yaw there's none, and smart determ smoothing is set default to 0 for yaw. The other major thing is we've disabled the dynamic notch filter by default. Now I know that a lot of you might think that sounds a little crazy, but hear me out. We only did this because every single tester that I had testing this preferred to fly with the dynamic filter turned off versus on. Now I didn't just go out and, just on a whim disable the dynamic notch filter by default. No, this has been tested and our quads just seem to fly better without it. And with the IMUF filter that we've added to the code and some other things we've done, I think we can get away without it and things work just fine. I mean, for the last month or two, I haven't flown with a dynamic filter on at all, on anything from tiny whips to toothpicks to 5-inch stuff. So, I mean, you can still set that on there if you want, but by default, it's not in the code. What did I add here? 0.2. Oh, this version I just increased the maximum value you could set for sharpness. Before it was like, 500? Now I've made it 5,000 because, yeah, I've been messing with things. 0.3.35. This one, the MSP has been updated. Also, you may notice that the VBAT PID compensation has changed a little bit. I did some talking to Not Fast Enough. He's a great guy. He was discussing how usually TPA and VBAT PID compensation, they'll kind of bash heads because you'll give a big throttle blip and your TPA will start to decrease your PIDs. Then if you have VBAT PID compensation turned on, as your battery voltage gets lower, it raises your PIDs. So essentially it's doing the opposite of what TPA is doing. And what he sort of found was that he played with things, found some stuff, and found that having VBAT PID compensation just affect your P term, which as you can see, that's what I did here, just affect your P term, but it works a lot better, can help you keep a more sharp feel throughout your whole flight. Doing TPA stronger on the D term, less on the P term, stuff like that, just makes VBAT PID compensation work better with TPA and everything else. So that's a cool addition, and there's probably going to be another cool update coming out with that in the near future. 0.2.36, I made the angle code better. I removed the angle I term because it was just causing some issues and wasn't quite working right. And it honestly just wasn't, even when I did get it to work, it just wasn't flying as well as with having it turned off. So now the angle code is just a PD controller, which, I mean, essentially the angle that you've set it to, in angle mode, it kind of acts like your I term, so you don't really need it because of the dynamics here. So I've just removed it. A little bit more simplicity, a little bit flying better, a little bit closer to how silverware does things. So all in all, a bit of simplification and a bit nicer angle. 237 was just some small changes to defaults, and added some code so that the new IMUF version will be compatible, so that so you can run the newest version of IMUF Lite on an older IMUF version and it won't give you issues. That's what this update mainly did. And then this newest update, 0.2.38, I added sharpness for normal flight controllers. Like I said before, the other sharpness was on a dynamic biquad filter. I put this on the Kalman filter because some of the math is quite similar in how it calculates things. So this will need more testing. But essentially on the Kalman part of the IMUF filter, I stuck the sharpness, there we go, that's what I'm calling it, and yeah, so there it is. I was looking there, I thought I didn't code it. I was really confused. But this Kalman State S, as you can see, that is the sharpness. Alright, I had a little brain fart there. But anyways, that's the sharpness. And when I've been testing this, because of how much more dynamic this makes the filter, I set my W values very high and my Q values very low to just have a bunch of filtering, and then I set my sharpness up really high. I've only had the chance to test this on a whoop, but on a little whoop, setting these values, close to 5,000 for sharpness and 100 for Q on each axis, and W all the way up to 512, it didn't really feel latent and gross. It felt fine, actually. It seemed to work well. So what I'm hoping, and a thought that I had with this, is that I might be able to do away with Q and W and just set them at some fairly high filtering values, so a low Q and a high W, and just allow the sharpness to deal with most of the other aspects of the Kalman filter. And I think that for the most part it could do that. It'll take some testing to determine that, and I'll need to update the IMUF filter for regular flight controllers. But once I've done that, not regular for Helio flight controllers, once I've done that, I'm thinking that it could very well be possible that sharpness could be removed in its, not sharpness, that Q and W could be removed as a user set setting and just be something that is static. And you just mess with sharpness, more sharpness to give you a sharper feel, less sharpness to give you a smoother feel, depending on some of your crafts. Like a big 10-inch, you might just have to run lower sharpness. And I really want to see some testing on this, because as I've been messing with it, I had the idea that Q and W might not be that essential anymore. If that's really the case, that would be really, really cool, and would make tuning filters that much easier, as it's just playing with the setting to change how sharp you want things to feel. And of course you might need to give more sharpness to get rid of some prop wash, because over filtering can give you prop wash issues. But I found that, at least with how I've coded the sharpness on the Helio boards, that it handles prop wash really well and filters more than before without giving you that delayed feel. So it sounds like a magic bullet that does everything without any problems, and just fixes things. And I think in a lot of cases it is that, from what I've seen. It sounds a bit extreme to just be able to say, oh yeah, it filters more, feels less latent, feels more locked in, handles things better, handles prop wash better. Those are big claims, but that's what my testers have been seeing. That's what the logs have been showing. So I'm hoping that it'll work out well. Probably not as well as it did on the Helio flight controllers for regular flight controllers, but I'm hoping it'll still work out quite well. So when you do test this on normal flight controllers, try to set higher W's than you normally would and lower Q values than you normally would, and then just try to play with sharpness. And maybe even go, all the way, go to like 10 Q, and don't go to 0 Q, but go to like 10, and maybe W of like 512, and just play around with different things, see how you can get it to feel, mess with the sharpness, find something that works, and we might be able to set a value for Q and W that'll be static in the future. Yeah, that's about all I've got for now. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks for watching. Bye.